Hello everyone. Team building has always been my favorite part of competitive Pokemon. In particular, I love building around Pokemon or strategies that I think are underrated. And in a game as complex as Pokemon, there are essentially an infinite amount of cool ideas that haven't been thoroughly explored. And I think of such ideas all the time. At this point, my brain is so trained to think about Pokemon when it's idle that I'll sometimes completely space out, and when I come back to reality, I have several new team building ideas I need to write down. But unfortunately, having tons of ideas doesn't translate to having tons of good ideas. The vast majority of my team building projects fail. Admittedly though, I do have a high bar for what I consider success. What I'm aiming for with all my ideas is viability. And by viable, I mean a Pokemon or strategy is part of a team that works well at a top level, and it is actually the best Pokemon for that team slot. These two criteria together are very difficult to achieve. You may be able to take a really wacky Pokemon and construct a team that supports it so well that it truly is the best for that slot, but then the team probably won't be so good as a whole. Or you can put your creative Pokemon with 5 extremely strong meta Pokemon that carry it to a decent level of success, but that team would be even better if there were something else in that spot. So my goal is to find some underrated Pokemon or strategy and build a team that proves it is viable. And I always do this in the main format. Competitive singles sorts Pokemon into tiers based on usage, with overused at the top, then underused, rarely used, never used, PU, and zero used. As you go down in tiers, the power level decreases. I often have team building ideas with Pokemon in lower tiers, quite commonly zero used in fact, but I never try to build them in a lower tier. I not only want to show a Pokemon is viable, I want to show that it's viable in overused. And I usually fail. Those that watch my videos generally just see the successes. I made a video about my rank 1 Mega Beedrill team and my Toxicroak Rain team that stayed in top ladder for weeks during one of the most competitive ladder tournaments of all time. I don't make videos about the ideas that don't do well. I'd say at least 80% of my more creative ideas end up being declared unviable, and this is after years of getting better at team building and spotting ideas with high potential. In the past, I'd say I had a 95% failure rate, maybe even higher. Still though, failure is perhaps too harsh a word. Even if I declare a Pokemon or strategy unviable, I almost always get a few good games where the idea works, the Pokemon pops off, and it's nice to see. Even if I know it wouldn't work consistently, my ideas are rarely so bad that it completely and utterly flops in every single game. But rarely is not never. Today I'll be going over the 6 biggest team building failures of my entire competitive Pokemon career. For each failure, I'll discuss why I saw potential in that Pokemon, why it failed, and if I think the idea or Pokemon has any potential in the future. We'll go over these in chronological order, starting with my oldest failure and ending with a failure that was just a couple of months ago. And since we're starting with my oldest devastating failure, we need to go back to Sword and Shield, Generation 8. This generation was, in my mind, the golden age for team building. The defensive Pokemon in the metagame were much more powerful than the offensive Pokemon, completely unlike Scarlet and Violet. Balance was the dominant archetype by far, and since you didn't have to worry about tons of crazy offensive threats or sweepers, it wasn't too difficult to fit unique lower-tier Pokemon onto your team. This seemed like the perfect metagame for the then-new Pokemon, Grapploct, to work. Grapploct is a mono fighting type with pretty atrocious stats. 118 attack is respectable, and its defenses aren't too bad with 80 HP, 90 defense, and 80 special defense, but that base 42 speed is brutal. That puts it at speed tiers where it needs significant investment to outpace defensive Pokemon. It needs 148 speed EVs just to outspeed Clefable. Its abilities aren't helping out much either. Limber prevents paralysis, which is kind of nice, but it's not an ability that any Pokemon is excited about. Now, its hidden ability, Technician, that is an ability that a lot of Pokemon would be excited about. Sadly, Grapploct is not one of those Pokemon. There really isn't a single move Grapploct gets that actually utilizes Technician well, other than, I suppose, Brutal Swing for a 90 base power dark move. But the fact that Grapploct would even theoretically run Brutal Swing shows you just how bad its move pool is. It does get the fighting moves you'd expect, like Close Combat, Bulk Up, and Drain Punch, and it also gets Sucker Punch for priority, and Ice Punch is a decent coverage move, but that's where the good news ends. Unlike many other fighting types, it doesn't get knockoff or earthquake. It also notably lacks Mach Punch, which would have been great priority to help compensate for its awful speed, and it would have gotten a Technician boost. And despite getting a lot of water moves and being an octopus, they didn't give it Aqua Jet either. In Sword and Shield, Grapploct was in the lowest tier, 0 used, and it was considered completely unviable in that tier, outclassed by the non-fully evolved Girder. But it got one move that made me think it might have what it took to make it an overused. Octolock. This move is similar to Block. If you use it against a non-ghost type, your opponent won't be able to switch out. But Octolock also lowers the target's defenses each turn it's on the field, including the first turn it's used. By stalling with Protect or Substitute, you could quickly make the opponent extremely frail and KO with Drain Punch, healing yourself up for another round of trapping. The set I used was Octolock, Substitute, Drain Punch, and Dig. Dig may seem like an odd choice, but it allowed Grapploct to destroy Toxapex, and it also gave another turn for lowered defenses, letting Grapploct get past would-be counters like Clefable. I even invested in HP and special defense, since survivability was more important than attack when your opponent's defenses are lowered every turn. I thought this idea had real potential, and I've always been fond of trapping, so I was excited to see if I could make it work. I put it on a fairly standard Sword and Shield overused team model with a Wish Teleport Clefable to keep Grapploct healthy, and Choice Specs Dragapult and Choice Band Weavile, both here to punish Slowbro, which I knew would be a bad matchup for Grapploct since it could escape Octolock with Teleport. I felt like I had a solid team, and I started testing it on the ladder. And immediately, it went horribly. First of all, there was no guarantee that my opponent would switch into my designed targets, like Toxapex and Clefable. They might just switch into Landorus, the most common Pokemon in the tier, and it completely shut this strategy down. Landorus could enter, set Stealth Rock for free, and just U-turn to escape the Octolock. Dragapult was also a nightmare to deal with. I couldn't trap it since it was a ghost type, and my only way to hit it was Dig, which Dragapult could easily just switch into a flying type to avoid. And then, of course, there's Slowbro, a top tier in Sword and Shield. I knew it would be a threat, but facing it felt so much worse than expected. It commonly used Future Sight and Teleport, allowing it to not just escape Octolock, but also set up a threatening attack for future turns. In general, there were also just a ton of pivoting moves in the tier, so escaping Octolock was not a hard task. It prevents direct switching, but not pivoting moves. And those issues are really just the tip of the iceberg of how bad this Pokemon was. Zapdos ruined it, Corviknight shut it down, Tornadus crushed it as well. There was a small chance my opponent would switch into something I could trap and KO, but it was rare. I ended up losing over 400 ELO testing Grapploct. To this day, the most ELO lost I can blame on a singular Pokemon. Honestly, the games where Grapploct performed best were the ones where it was used as a sack and never even clicked a move. So, is there any hope for Grapploct in the future? Well, no, not at all. The best way to use Grapploct is probably as a standard attacker. Close Combat, Ice Punch, Sucker Punch, and Bulk Up, probably with a Life Orb. This set is undoubtedly way better than the Octolock nonsense I tried, but the problem is, without Octolock, you can't really justify using Grapploct. That's what made it unique. If you want to go with a just typical attacking set, there are dozens of fighting types that can do that way better. I'm extremely confident that Grapploct is completely unviable, and I don't think it will ever have a real place in any major format. Some major buffs in the future might change that, but even this I doubt. My next big failure was also in Generation 8, with an Ultra Beast you probably forgot about, Guzzlord. It's a Dark and Dragon type, which is pretty solid both defensively and offensively if you have a way to hit Fairy types. Guzzlord has a 570 base stat total like all Ultra Beasts, but its distribution is by far the worst of all of them. It has 223 base HP, closing in on Blissey itself, but then its chances at being truly bulky are destroyed by base 53 in both defenses. So that's 329 points gone on bulk, and it still feels frail. Bulk can be approximated by multiplying a Pokemon's defense and their HP stat. So, for example, how well a Pokemon takes physical hits is approximated by HP times physical defense. And as the numbers being multiplied get closer to one another, the product increases. So having this massive disparity between defense and HP makes Guzzlord way more frail than you'd think. But the stat news just gets worse. It has 43 base speed, just 1 point higher than Grapploct. And then they wasted its remaining stats on giving it 2 mediocre attacking stats, 101 attack and 97 special attack. Whoever decided on these stats absolutely hated Guzzlord. Things look up in its move pool, though. It gets all the attacks it could possibly want. Knockoff, Earthquake, Draco Meteor, of course, and Heavy Slam and Heat Crash, which it uses very well with how heavy it is. It doesn't get any good setup moves, unfortunately, although I don't know how effective Dragon Dance would be on a Pokemon this slow. And worst of all, no recovery moves. Guzzlord was in the never used tier, where it was considered a top tier threat, but this is a long way from overused. Still, its incredible coverage and seemingly decent bulk was what made me give it a try. I wanted to use an all-out attacking Assault Vest set to make use of its bulk and coverage. I went with Knockoff, Earthquake, Heavy Slam, and Heat Crash, Adamant max invested for power, and the rest in special defense to drastically increase its special bulk. I paired it with Slowbro, a complementary physical wall that appreciated how Guzzlord could switch into special grass, electric, and ghost attacks. Slowbro also can use Trick Room, allowing Guzzlord to become a real threat against more offensive teams. I took to the latter with high hopes, and as I'm sure you saw coming, Guzzlord was terrible. There were so many problems. The biggest was just its damage output. 101 attack isn't much. Despite being 120 base power, its heavy slams were doing only 60% to defensive Clefable, and Clefable could outspeed and threaten with a Moonblast. Its 120 base power Heat Crashes didn't even 2-hit KO Corviknight. The damage output was just sad. Basically, any decently bulky physical Pokemon could shut down Guzzlord forever. It was okay on the defensive side, but its lack of recovery made it unreliable in this role as well, and I couldn't even use a Wish Passer to help with this, since its HP is so insanely high. Guzzlord repeatedly did barely any damage and just slowly died to attacks, or quickly died to attacks. There were 3 Tapus in the tier, so there were no shortage of fairy attacks to destroy it. But could Guzzlord ever work in the future? I doubt it, but it is possible. Perhaps a very favorable metagame in a doubles format could work for it, seeing as Trick Room is a stronger strategy there, but that hasn't worked out well in the past. Guzzlord had 2 generations of VGC to prove itself worth using, and it never did. Maybe a more defensive Arrest Talk set could work in Overused if it walls a lot of top tiers. That's possible as well. It will definitely need a very favorable metagame to work, but I'll be keeping my eye on it. I love its design, and it has an amazing shiny form. Now, for another Pokemon you probably forgot about, Octillery. It was introduced in Generation 2. It was bad then, and it's only been getting worse since. It's a mono water type, not defensively bad, but offensively quite disappointing. Its stats are also terrible. 480 base stat total already doesn't sound great, but the distribution is really what kills it. It has a mediocre 105 in both attack and special attack, and 75 in HP in both defenses, and base 45 speed. It is these stats that placed Octillery in the zero used tier, and like the last octopus we discussed, it wasn't even good in zero used. It was outclassed and considered unviable. You're probably noticing a pattern here with awful speed stats leading to tragedy, but this time I anticipated it a bit better. I knew Octillery was going to need more than just one Trick Room Slowbro. I needed to put it on a full Trick Room team. But why does it deserve such support? There are a lot of strong Trick Room abusers out there. Well, it's certainly not its abilities. Moody is banned in singles, Suction Cups preventing being forced out really doesn't matter here, and Sniper is cool, but Octillery doesn't have the bulk or speed to be setting up focus energy. Trick Room runs out fast, and it needs to hit hard right away. The reason it's on the team is Water Spout. Other than Mega Blastoise and Kyogre, Octillery is the strongest Pokemon that learns Water Spout. So I figured if I put it on a Rain Trick Room team with other major threats like Crawdaunt, it could really pop off. I gave it a choice specs with Water Spout, of course, Surf in case I got weakened to the point where Water Spout wasn't strong enough, and Ice Beam and Energy Ball as coverage. I took it on the ladder, and surprisingly, my first few games actually went alright. Octillery wasn't consistent, but the team as a whole was doing okay, and Octillery did get to spam Water Spout a couple times. But pretty soon, reality hit. Rillaboom was one of the most used Pokemon in Sword and Shield Overused, and it was a massive problem for both Rain and Trick Room teams. Both archetypes had to heavily consider Rillaboom when building, since it had the insanely powerful Grassy Glide, which was 70 base power in Generation 8. To combine Rain and Trick Room was basically asking to get destroyed by Rillaboom, and get destroyed I did. I tried different ways of making my team more resistant to Rillaboom, but nothing worked. To make Rain and Trick Room worthwhile, the team needed really strong abusers like Octillery and Crawdont, but that basically guaranteed a loss to Rillaboom. If I made the team better against Rillaboom, it became worse against every other team, as I couldn't utilize these strong Rain Trick Room abusers. The team had plenty of other issues as well. No electric immunity, other threats like Tapu Fini. There were way too many holes. It was a sinking ship that was impossible to patch. So is there any hope for Octillery in the future? If there is, it is almost certainly involving Rain and Trick Room in a doubles format. In singles, I really doubt it. If Octillery was in Generation 9, it would be similarly terrible. Although Rillaboom isn't as popular, threats like Raging Bolt and Ogerpon Wellspring would absolutely bury this poor octopus. If just the right metagame conditions occur where Rain Trick Room somehow becomes viable, there's a chance, but I'd bet against it. Now, my next major failure was in Generation 9. Whiscash. But before we get to that, a brief word from today's sponsor. Team building is hard. Finding the right Pokemon to add, EVs, Terra types, moves, the complexity sometimes hurts, but there's a product that can ease that burden. Heavy-duty boots. Hazards are everywhere, and avoiding them is great. Sure, there may be a better item out there somewhere for your Pokemon, but finding it is so hard. Just slap the boots on and move on with your build. Heavy-duty boots. Don't think, just do it. A huge thank you to HDB Enterprises for sponsoring this video. Now back to Whiscash. It has the defensively fantastic and offensively decent water and ground typing, its only weakness being grass. Its stats are rather disappointing, but not terrible. 110 HP, 78 defense, and 71 special defense is decent bulk. 78 attack and 60 speed, though, are both quite poor. Its move pool is surprisingly solid. It gets the typical stabs you'd expect like Earthquake, Liquidation, and Waterfall, but it also gets both Stealth Rock and Spikes. Still, if you want a Stealth Rock and Spike setting water ground type, it's outclassed by Quagsire and Gastrodon. What really made me think Whiscash had a chance is that it gets Dragon Dance and the ability Hydration. Hydration cures status at the end of the turn if Rain is active. So if you use Rest when Rain is up, you heal 100% of your health and any status conditions. I figured if I paired Dragon Dance with Rest, I'd have a pretty bulky setup sweeper that could full heal itself at any time and run through tons of teams. I gave it Dragon Dance, Rest, Waterfall, and Earthquake. Enough speed for outpacing Great Tusk after a Dragon Dance, and the rest in HP and special defense. I figured that bulk was more important than attack, since, thanks to Rest, as long as I could take hits well enough, I had plenty of time to use Dragon Dance and boost my power. And I went with Terra Grass to eliminate Whiscash's only weakness. This theoretically allowed it to get past threats like Rillaboom, Meowscarada, and Ogerpon Wellspring. The rest of my team was a fairly standard Rain build, the only unusual pick being a Choice Specs Moltres. I figured it was good to have a Grass Resist in there, since I didn't want to have to Terra Whiscash every game. I took it on the ladder, and instantly I was taught a lesson. That lesson being, Whiscash is horrible. The power output was just unbelievably bad. Even after several Dragon Dances, Whiscash wasn't hitting hard. It got stat checked by the OU tier. If my opponent kindly allowed Whiscash to set up to +6, then sure, maybe it could 2-hit KO some stuff, but all they really had to do was switch into a Pokemon with a decent attacking stat and start clicking buttons. Whiscash has decent bulk, but it did so little damage that it couldn't stop opponents from going into breakers like Kyurem or Primarina, not to mention more threatening breakers like Rillaboom and Ogerpon Wellspring. Sure, I could Terra to avoid some of these issues, but then my opponent could just go into something that hits grass super effectively. Most sweepers use that defensive Terra to get 1 or 2 more turns of setup, which leads to KOs, but Whiscash needed about 4 or 5 more turns of setup to really become a threat, not just 1 or 2. On top of that, Whiscash made all of Rain's existing problems worse. It didn't help with Rillaboom or Ogerpon Wellspring, it didn't help with Dragonite, it didn't help with Kingambit. It just took up a slot, almost never did anything, and lost to all of the things that Rain teams already struggled with. I don't think there's any hope for Whiscash. It's a very cute Pokemon, and I love its oblivious appearance, but it just doesn't have the stats for a major format. I will say though, Lapras has much better stats, and it gets Dragon Dance and Hydration. Perhaps it could succeed where Whiscash failed. Moving on, this next Pokemon is probably the first one in this video that isn't extremely forgettable, which is ironic since it's a fossil Pokemon, Rampardos. This poor guy is Mono Rock, pretty bad both offensively and defensively, and its stat spread is enough to elicit tears in even the most cold-hearted. 165 attack is undeniably absolutely amazing, but every other stat is awful. You could argue 97 HP is decent, and normally I'd agree, but it means nothing with 60 defense and 50 special defense. And 58 speed means you're getting outpaced by basically every single offensive Pokemon. A rock type this frail and slow simply cannot work. But I thought, just maybe, since I can use Terra to change that rock typing, it might just have a shot. And a big part of what convinced me there was maybe a chance was its ability, Mold Breaker. This means its attacks ignore the abilities of other Pokemon. Most notably, this means unaware Pokemon will take full damage from Rampardos' stat boosts, and it gets Swords Dance. So I figured that even if Rampardos wasn't great in most battles, if I faced a really bulky team or a stall team, it would basically be an instant win. In addition to Swords Dance, I gave it Head Smash, its 150 base power stab move, Fire Punch to hit steel types, and perhaps most importantly of all, Trail Blaze. With Terra Grass giving Trail Blaze the weak move power boost, it became 90 base power when factoring in stab, but more importantly, it gave Rampardos a way to boost its horrible speed. I wanted to give this dinosaur all the support I possibly could, so I added a Terrain Extender Rillaboom to provide grassy terrain. This boosts the power of Trail Blaze and combines nicely with Leftovers to heal Rampardos, giving it more longevity and helping it with Head Smash recoil. I also added Aurora Veil, so Rampardos actually had a chance to set up and get going. With those defenses and speed, either Veil or Screens was always a necessity. The rest of the team was filled in as a pretty standard grassy terrain hyper offense, the only unusual set being Agility Hatterene. The team as a whole actually performed okay, but Rampardos itself was absolutely useless. It managed to do decent in some endgames, but it only ever did something when the game was basically already over. Any sweeper could have cleaned from that point. Most games, I was forced to just use it as a sack. Even with Aurora Veil up, it took so much damage from almost every attack, and the Head Smash recoil didn't help. I gave it all the support I possibly could, but the awful stats were just too much to overcome. It wasn't even that great against bulky teams. It's difficult to find setup opportunities when even stall Pokemon deal significant damage. You could Terra Grass to avoid getting destroyed by Gliscor's Earthquake and Dondozo's Body Press and Waterfall, but even then Rampardos gets shut down by common sets like Terra Fighting Body Press Dondozo. The one thing I thought it would do exceptionally well, it failed at. On top of a disappointing performance against every other archetype, not managing to even break stall was the final nail in the coffin for the dreams of Rampardos. I highly doubt it has any place in future metagames either, unless it gets the ability Speed Boost or something crazy. I also want to address Trick Room. People always bring this up when discussing Rampardos as a solution to its horrible speed, but this doesn't work either. Especially with new additions like Ursaluna and Iron Hands, there is no reason to be using Rampardos. At least in singles, there are much stronger Trick Room abusers. It's severely outclassed in this role. Its one shot was as a stall breaker, and it didn't work. It sees some very limited usage on Trick Room teams in doubles formats because Rock Slide is kind of a broken spread move, but even its usage in doubles is extremely small, and it has no significant results. Alright, now for the last failure of this video, and the most recent one, just a couple months ago. I thought I could make Regidrago work. It's a mono dragon type with what I'd argue is the worst stat distribution of all Regis. For starters, it got the Guzzlord treatment, crazy high HP and terrible defenses. It's not as severe as Guzzlord, but the same issues apply. And it's got mediocre mixed attacking stats like Guzzlord as well, 100 in both attack and special attack, but at least it does use both of these stats on different sets. Its 80 base speed is where it thankfully separates itself from Guzzlord. This isn't fast, but it's enough to utilize a Choice Scarf well. Its ability Dragon's Maw is absolutely amazing, giving a 1.5 times boost to every dragon move it uses. This is better than adaptability. The 1.5 times stab multiplier is multiplied by Dragon's Maw for a 2.25 times overall boost to dragon moves. And it has the moves with the power to back this up, most notably Dragon Energy, a dragon-type version of Eruption or Water Spout, 150 base power at full health. It also gets the typical dragon moves like Draco Meteor, Dragon Pulse, Outrage, Scale Shot, and Dragon Claw. It even gets Dragon Dance to set up. Its coverage at a glance doesn't appear horrible either. It gets Earthquake, Fire Fang, and Hammer Arm as physical coverage and Earth Power as special coverage. Not great, but seemingly workable. Until you consider Fairy types, the ultimate enemy of Regidrago. It has absolutely nothing to hit a Fairy type hard. Some consider Terra the solution for this, Terra Blast, Poison, or Steel. While Terra Blast is now banned and overused, it was legal when I built Regidrago, but even then I disregarded this option. A Terra Blast Regidrago is a desperate attempt to make an inconsistent Pokemon consistent. In doing so, you take away the one thing it can do well, spam powerful dragon moves. It really needs Terra Dragon to excel at this task. Terra Blast, Poison, or Steel is an ineffective half measure that doesn't even end up killing Fairy types. They usually tank the hit just fine, unless the Fairy type is frail or already heavily chipped. My approach instead was to pair Regidrago with a powerful Steel type breaker, Choice Specs Iron Crown. When a Fairy type tried to enter and shut down Regidrago, I could switch into Iron Crown and break. Obviously, my opponent won't just leave in the Fairy to die, but I could make progress by clicking powerful Choice Specs boosted attacks on the other team members. And as for the Regidrago itself, I decided on a Choice Scarf set, as its usual speed tier is awful and overused, slower than nearly every offensive threat, but with the Choice Scarf, it outspeeds even Dragapult. Despite my best efforts though, this team did not perform well at all. For starters, I underestimated just how many teams had a Fairy type. It's almost all of them. I also overestimated Iron Crown's breaking capabilities. Sure, I could catch a Fairy type switching into Regidrago, but my opponent might just then switch to a wall for Iron Crown. Even Choice Specs Iron Crown is shut down by a surprisingly large number of Pokemon. I also had the issue that Terra Fairy Pokemon could just ruin Regidrago's day at any time, and a team without Fairy types is even more likely to have something with Terra Fairy. There were some games where the opponent had no Fairy type, or let the Fairy type be KO'd, and those went well, but they were rare. Ultimately, Choice Scarf Regidrago is badly outclassed by Choice Specs Dragapult. Yes, Regidrago's Dragon moves are much stronger, but Dragapult isn't fully reliant on Dragon moves, a massive difference. I'll certainly never use this set again, unless Fairy types get removed from the game for some reason. Is there any hope for Regidrago? I'd actually say yes, just not with a Choice Scarf set. I feel like Dragon Dance has real potential. These sets aren't as weak to Fairy. They can use Substitute plus Leftovers with a defensive Terra type and use a lot of Fairies as setup fodder. Or Life Orb Explosion to take the Fairies down with them, perhaps paving the way for other Dragon types on the team to sweep. These sets are probably outclassed by other Dragon Dance users, but I'd say there's a chance, and I'll probably give Regidrago another try. Well, those are my top team building failures. These Pokemon all left me with a feeling of complete hopelessness, either with the set I was using or the Pokemon as a whole. But this is part of the process. Without failures like this, I wouldn't have any great successes either. So if you're trying to make a wacky Pokemon work and failing horribly, just know you're not alone. I've been team building at a high level for nearly a decade, and I still pursue complete dead ends sometimes. But don't give up. Maybe this idea you're working on is actually good, but you're just not approaching it the right way. Or even if the Pokemon or strategy you're trying to make work is truly terrible and has no potential, maybe your next idea will be different. Above all, have fun and stay creative. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps out a lot. And the last 3 Pokemon on this list, I actually built and tested live. So if you want to see me suffer, those VODs are linked in the description. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.